3 years ago, I came into possession of a box of letters that should never have survived. The box was found in the cellar of an abandoned courthouse in Iberville Parish, Louisiana, beneath a false wall that had been sealed with a priest's sigil and dated 1834. Inside were the writings of Dr. Elias Whitley, a physician and landowner, whose family once presided over a vast estate along the Bayou Des Chains. What those pages contained part confession, part medical records spoke of something far older than the Whitlow bloodline, something the good doctor believed had been born beneath his land. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The first entries are clinical, almost mundane. Whitlow describes the swamp's unusual hum in midsummer, a choral vibration that causes the surface water to ripple, though no wind moves. He attributes it to barometric changes, but by August of that year, the tone shifts. His handwriting deteriorates. He begins recording dreams, recurring visions of a child made of soil, rising from the cane fields, its mouth filled with whispers instead of breath. He claims that on August 14, 1834, his sister Margaret returned from a visit to New Orleans with gifts of knowledge from a woman who practiced what she called root medicine. Margaret's education had always been unusual for her. Sex and interest in anatomy and early chemistry that scandalized the local parish. But what she brought back was something else entirely. Elias writes, "She has learned to speak to the land as though it were awake, as though the blood spilled upon it these centuries past were a living language. At first, the household dismissed her odd behavior collecting soil samples, arranging candles in geometrical patterns, keeping watch through the night. But then the servants began hearing singing in the fields, low and resonant, sometimes joined by voices that didn't belong to any living soul. By the 20th of August, the animals had grown restless. The horses refused to approach the barn. Milk soured overnight. And in one entry written just before dawn, Elias noted, "The cane grows in unnatural symmetries, though planted by something beneath." Neighbors reported that Margaret had begun sending anonymous letters directing families to graves long forgotten, claiming she could name the unmarked dead. Some of the recipients found bones exactly where she described. Others unearthed heirlooms that had vanished generations before. She said it was not divination. But remembrance, Elias's skepticism faltered only after the night he found her in the family chapel, kneeling before the altar, murmuring in an unknown tongue while the crucifix above her wept a dark, resin-like fluid. When he attempted to intervene, Margaret looked up at him with eyes black as river silt and said, "It's not me who remembers, brother. It's the ground." Her journals, which survived only in fragments, mention a child, neither real nor spectral, yet heavy in the air, like the moment before thunder. She called it the remembering one. Within months, the Whitlow estate began to fail, first the crops, then the family's health, and finally Elias's faith. He wrote of rashes forming in the shape of script, of whispers emerging from the well at dusk, of the soil itself exhaling when disturbed. The final entry of that first notebook ends abruptly. The child grows stronger. Its eyes open where roots meet bone. The land is teaching itself to speak. The following winter brought no relief. The Whitlow estate, once among the most prosperous in the parish, fell into a quiet ruin. Workers deserted, claiming that the ground beneath the cane fields breathed like a beast in slumber. Elias's notes grow increasingly desperate during these months, oscillating between medical reasoning and frightened confession. He continued his practice in town, but each night returned to a house that no longer felt his own. The walls sweated in the humidity of December, as though exhaling. The windows fogged from within, not without. The servants refused to sleep indoors, building makeshift cots near the stables instead. Margaret, meanwhile, became a figure of local fascination. She was said to be delivering letters without seal or postage, left at the doorsteps of families who had lost relatives to yellow fever or the river crossings. The letters contained hand-drawn maps and instructions leading to lost remains. In every case, the dead were found precisely as described. When confronted, she insisted she had not written them. They write themselves. Through me, rumors spread that she had made contact with something ancient older than the soil itself. Elias describes visiting her room one evening in February. He found her bent over a candlelit desk, sketching spirals in ink made from soot and milk. She did not look up when he entered, but said, "If the land remembers pain, then perhaps it can be taught to remember peace." He begged her to stop, to leave Iberville, but she smiled and replied, "The remembering cannot be stopped, only guided." From this point, the tone of the letters changes. Elias's words are marked by both awe and revulsion. He begins to write not as a doctor, but as a man recording a slow possession. "I dream of the earth breathing beneath my bed. I dream of fields that hum in unison with my pulse. The air smells of copper. When I wake, my fingernails are caked with soil I do not recall touching." Neighbors began reporting peculiar acts. Margaret was seen leaving small parcels at crossroads, bundles wrapped in oilcloth, containing documents and seals of ownership long thought destroyed. Some parcels returned land to families dispossessed generations earlier. Others revealed crimes carefully hidden. Local clergy labeled her mad. Yet those who followed her directions found truths that no sane person should have. Known by the spring of 1835, Elias confided to his private journal that he feared for his own mind. He began hearing his sister's voice even when she was away, whispering phrases that compelled him toward acts of inexplicable mercy, treating freedmen without charge, petitioning local councilmen to end certain trade practices, even writing to a state senator with radical proposals about restitution. "It is not I who writes," he noted, echoing his sister's words. "The hand moves before I command it." His fellow physicians ridiculed him. His correspondence was intercepted and mocked. But somewhere in those months, his doubt turned into faith of a kind not sanctioned by any church. Margaret's behavior, meanwhile, grew both luminous and terrible. She was seen walking barefoot into the fields at night, arms raised, chanting in a language no one could place part Latin, part something older. The ground trembled faintly beneath her steps, as though recognizing her in one surviving witness statement, likely that of the estate's caretaker. She was heard to say, "The child beneath the earth is not a curse. It is the memory of justice denied." And then, abruptly, in Elias's March journal, a single, chilling line, "The child is awake." The events of that Christmas Eve were reconstructed from fragments Elias's surviving pages, to witness accounts, and a burned letter recovered from the ruins. None agree entirely, but all share the same dreadful pattern, the sense of something beneath that could no longer be ignored. The estate's last Christmas gathering was intended as a reconciliation. Elias, frail and sunken-eyed, invited neighboring families under the pretense of celebrating Margaret's recovery. Yet several guests later wrote that the woman who welcomed them was not the same Margaret Whitlow. Her eyes held a stillness unnatural to the living. She spoke softly, yet her words carried through the air like the hum of iron wires. Dinner was served by trembling hands. The servants crossed themselves with every dish. Outside, the wind shifted strangely, carrying no chill, only the smell of turned soil. Margaret led the guests in a toast. To remembrance, she said, lifting her glass. To what was taken and to what will rise again. Those who drank recalled the taste of copper and smoke. Eliezer's journal for that night, written in a cramped, uneven script, describes the precise moment he realized his sister had orchestrated something far greater than a simple supper. She asked that all doors remain unbarred, all windows unlatched. She said the house must breathe. Then she took the small bundle she'd carried for months, wrapped in linen, bound with hemp string, and placed it upon the table before the guests. The silence was unbearable. I begged her to stop, but Margaret only smiled. She cut the twine and unfolded the cloth, revealing a clump of soil molded into the shape of an infant's skull, threaded through with roots. Gasps filled the hall. She whispered, "He remembers." Lightning struck the far cane field, though no storm had gathered. The house shuddered as if in answer. Several guests fled, screaming. Others swore the candles dimmed to a colorless glow, their flames sinking inward rather than rising. Elias's handwriting deteriorates beyond legibility for several lines. Then, beneath the smudges, she told me the earth itself demanded its due, that every sin of possession, every theft of land and blood must be The ground is her confessor. The caretaker's statement adds one last image: Margaret standing barefoot in the doorway, whispering to the night beyond, her dress wet with rain that hadn't yet fallen. She held the soil skull aloft and placed it gently at the threshold. The moment it touched the earth, the fields beyond the estate gave a sound like 1,000 sighs escaping at once. By morning, the guests had fled, the servants were gone, and the Whitlow home was empty. Only Elias remained. His final recorded words were addressed to no one. She is not dead. She is in the ground now, and the ground remembers her kindly. Afterward, the parish authorities sealed the property, and the Whitlow family name was struck from the registry for reasons never publicly stated. For decades, locals refused to pass near the abandoned house. They said, on cold nights, the soil still pulsed beneath one's feet, steady and rhythmic like a sleeping heartbeat waiting to wake again. And in the parish records, one curious note dated February 1836 appears in the margin beside Elias's name, declared missing. Body not recovered. Fields reclaimed by roots of unusual depth. When the Whitlow property was finally resurveyed in the spring of 1836, nothing remained of the original homestead except the shell of the main house and a single surviving chimney. The inspector's report noted an unnatural subsidence of the earth, as though the land itself had swallowed its structures. The surrounding fields, once cane, now barren, showed a strange lattice of cracks radiating outward from the cellar's foundation. Like veins, in the following years, the land changed hands several times. No owner kept it longer than one season. Livestock refused to graze near the central pasture. Tools rusted overnight. One farmhand reported hearing a woman's voice humming under the soil. Another swore he saw light moving beneath the ground at dusk, as though candles burned inside the roots. Locals came to call the place the Remembering Acre. Children dared one another to press their ears to the earth and listen. Most came away pale, refusing to speak of what they Heard Dr. Mellor's compiled documents suggest that the Whitlow events may have inspired an early form of rural spiritualism, a belief that memory was a living tissue in the landscape itself. One letter, attributed to a parish priest in 1838, reads, "The soil in that quarter refuses forgiveness. It exhales confession." Margaret and Ilias's names faded into rumor, yet every few years, someone claimed to glimpse a woman matching Margaret's likeness, walking along the edge of the levee at twilight, barefoot, her dress dragging wet clay. Those who approached her said she did not flee. She only asked, "Do you remember what was buried?" In 1842, a group of surveyors hired to measure a new canal project reported unearthing human remains in a shallow basin beneath the property's northwest slope. The bones were twisted with roots so completely that separating them was impossible. Among them, a fragment of a silver locket engraved with the initials E.W. was catalogued, then lost from the archives by century's end. Dr. Mellor's closing notes from 1901 are clinical but uneasy. No geological explanation has satisfied the recurring phenomenon of rhythmic subsidence reported on the old Whitlow site. Attempts at excavation result in immediate flooding from below, as if the ground itself resists exposure. The last attempt, 1889, ended in the drowning of 3 laborers. Their bodies were recovered days later, each mouth filled with silt and sprouting reeds. Locals still leave offerings along the old fence line, glass beads and scraps of cloth, without claiming to know why. They say it quiets the humming for a while. One field diary entry by a regional historian, dated 1896, perhaps captures the truth most simply. The land does not forget injustice. It holds it until someone listens. Even now, a faint tremor runs through the acreage during heavy rain, when the soil loosens and breathes. Farmers nearby swear they can feel it through their boots. The slow pulse of something vast and remembering beneath. And those who have stood there alone, after dusk, report an impression, faint but insistent, of a heartbeat syncing with their own. When they finally step away, the rhythm lingers in the soles of their feet for days. Whether the earth remembers mercy as easily as pain, no one can say. The first official trace of the Whitlow affair after the estate's collapse appears not in parish archives, but within the administrative ledgers of the Louisiana Board of Physicians. A series of anonymous case notes, entered in late 1837, describe an E.W. conducting private experiments involving neural inheritance and the retention of emotive stimuli in organic tissue. Though the initials were never formally attributed, the handwriting slanted, sparse, feverish matches Elias Whitlow's surviving correspondence almost exactly. The notes detail his attempts to translate the language of memory into medical comprehension. He believed that grief, guilt, and love were not abstractions but materials, capable of transfer or decay like any bodily function. The term he used, emotive conduction, appears repeatedly, as does the notion that the body's cells could preserve moral history. One entry dated February 1838 reads, "Margaret proved the principle in soil. I must now prove it in flesh." Over the next months, the casebook becomes progressively fragmented, moving between empirical observation and reverent delirium. Elias writes of taking samples of decayed vegetation from the Whitlow fields roots entwined with fine filaments of bonan, submitting them to saline suspension. He reports faint movements under the glass, as though the matter were respiring. Another note, the substance emits a low hum beyond auditory measure. Instruments tremble at proximity. The frequency corresponds to a human pulse. Elias's obsession turned surgical. He began performing procedures at night in an unlicensed laboratory near Iberville, assisted by 2 apprentices whose names are redacted in the official record. Both later vanished. Witnesses described a smell of copper and sugarcane rot emanating from the premises. One physician's report, written after a covert inspection, accuses him of violating every tenet of ethical medicine. The subject upon his table was not cadaverous, yet neither could it be called living. Its chest rose at uneven intervals. Its veins carried water and clay rather than blood. Whitlow insisted the form was learning to remember. The board convened in the summer of 1839 to investigate. No conviction followed. Delius disappeared before he could be summoned. His laboratory was found deserted, the instruments rusted through, the floorboards soft and wet as if the river itself had seeped upward through the foundation. Among the papers recovered was a final, half-burned note. If Margaret spoke through the land, I must teach the body to listen. Memory will no longer die with the mind. It will walk again. Afterward, the ledgers fall silent. But for decades, scattered physicians along the Gulf reported receiving anonymous packages, jars, containing preserved tissue suspended in dark fluid, labeled only with the phrase, "Observe the pulse." No records survive of any successful replication of Whitlow's process. Yet in 1844, a patient admitted to the Baton Rouge asylum claimed that his veins beat in rhythm with the ground and that the doctor from the mud had touched his chest in the night. The physicians dismissed him as delusional till the following morning, when they found the floor beneath his cot damp with black soil, and a faint vibration rising through the stone foundation. Elias Whitlow was never seen again. But in certain corners of the medical community, his theories of emotive conduction became a forbidden topic whispered under candlelight, relic of science trespassing into faith, and each time a doctor felt the subtle tremor of their own pulse mismatched with their heart, they wondered briefly, quietly, if the earth beneath their feet was listening back. In the years following Whitlow's disappearance, the estate was dismantled plank by plank. Yet certain fragments of his work survived not as theory, but as artifact. Dr. Adrian Meller, then a young physician working for the parish coroner's office, recorded that one such fragment was delivered anonymously in a crate-marked botanical sample. The parcel contained a sealed jar of murky solution in which floated what Meller at first assumed was a malformed plant root. Upon closer inspection, he realized the fibrous material bore the unmistakable pattern of veins, branching in symmetry to perfect Famia flora. He labeled it specimen W-1 in his 1843 notes. Meller describes observing faint, periodic contractions along the thicker tendrils. Not a pulsation, he wrote, but a recoil, as though the tissue seeks reunion with something absent. The specimen became his private obsession. He tested it under heat, under cold, and under saline exposure. None altered its condition. Each incision healed within hours, knitting closed without discoloration. When burned, the tissue released a smell reminiscent of river silt after a flood. By 1845, Meller was convinced the sample represented a biological impossibility, organic material sustained without source or decay. His tone darkened. It moves with the patience of soil. Perhaps that is what it is, a seed of memory, a remnant of the Whitlow method. He began corresponding with a colleague in New Orleans, Dr. R. Arnaud, sending sketches and tissue slivers. Arnos replies, preserved in translation, warn Mella to destroy it immediately. This is no preserved tissue. It is an active archive. Whatever you have opened, it is storing not life, but experience. Mella ignored the warning. In the summer of 1846, he reported auditory phenomena emanating from the jar, a faint hum like distant machinery, occasionally punctuated by low vibrations perceptible through his desk. He wrote of dreaming the same dream, repeatedly a house without doors sinking into wet ground, and a woman standing over it whispering, "Do you remember what was buried?" By 1848, the jar had begun to cloud from within. Small bubbles formed against the glass, releasing a black sediment that stained any surface it touched. Mella's final recorded attempt at analysis reads, "Under magnification, the sediment resolves into cellular patterns resembling human epithelial tissue. They pulse in clusters, synchronized to my own heartbeat. When I move away, they grow still." That same year, the specimen disappeared from his laboratory. Mella resigned his position and retreated from public practice. Citing a sickness of moral certainty, he reappeared briefly in 1856. Living near the bayou edge in a house built entirely of reclaimed wood from the Whitlow estate, visitors described him as lucid, gentle, and always listening ear pressed to the ground. He told one interviewer, "She's still teaching the earth to remember. I only help her listen." The following spring, Mella was found dead in his chair, his skin unusually pale and dry. The local coroner noted fine filaments emerging from beneath his fingernails and ankles, as though delicate roots sought anchorage. No jar was recovered, only a damp ring upon the table where one had stood. Later inspection of the soil beneath. The house revealed unusual traces of calcium and phosphorus, consistent with human bone. The official report concludes that Dr. Mella died of natural causes, but his final, unfinished sentence, scrawled across the margin of his journals, suggests otherwise. She remembers more clearly each year. By 1861, the war had reached the valley that once held the Whitlow estate. The field where the great house had stood was used briefly as a Confederate camp. Soldiers reported sleeplessness, erratic moods, and sudden bouts of nausea. Horses refused to graze there. Even the crows avoided its fences. One lieutenant, in a letter sent to his wife, described the first night's encampment. "The air itself vibrates here, as though the ground hums beneath the tents. A tone low as thunder, yet without storm. I hear it even when the wind dies." Men awoke screaming, swearing that something was singing through the soil beneath their bedroom. Several deserted before dawn. Their prints, according to the surviving records, led straight into the marsh and vanished. Locals began calling the place the Humming Ground. After the war, the field lay empty. But in 1873, when a new road was planned across the property, engineers encountered a phenomenon that halted construction. The ground, though dry above, bled black water from within. It seeped upward through the crushed gravel, staining boots and iron alike. Workers claimed to hear whispers rising with the moisture, syllables just beyond comprehension. The surveyor, one George Ellison, recorded in his field journal, "It is not mud. It is memory liquefied. When I touch it, I recall moments that are not mean a child hiding under floorboards. A woman reciting prayers in a language my own tongue cannot pronounce." Ellison burned the pages of his journal 3 days later, but not before writing one last note in the margin. "I think she's listening through the ground." By the 1890s, Traveling preachers avoided the valley altogether. They claimed the land refused to take a blessing. A tent revival held nearby ended abruptly when the crowd fell silent midst a moan, each person turning toward the old field as one. A sound rose low and resonant. Neither wind nor voice, but something between, and all the oil lamps went out simultaneously. That night, witnesses said they saw faint lights moving across the field in slow spirals, as if a congregation of will-o'-the-wisps had gathered to worship. An elderly black woman named Cora Hensley, descendant of those enslaved at Whitlow, visited the field often despite warnings. To the townsfolk she was a curiosity, a relic of the old world, but she claimed to understand what others feared. The ground hums because it remembers, she told a reporter in 1901. Every name they took from us, every tongue they silenced, it's still in their breathing. You listen right, you'll hear your own name in that song, too. Cora died a year later, her body found sitting upright at the edge of the field, palms pressed into the soil. No sign of struggle. The only disturbance was the circle of grass around her, bent outward, not inward, as though something beneath had exhaled. Her funeral drew people from 3 states. Some came to mourn, others came out of morbid curiosity. Yet when the hymns began, several swore they heard another voice join in, a layered harmony rising from the dirt itself, deep and resonant, unmistakably human. Those who attended said the sound didn't frighten them. It filled them with a sorrow too large for words, followed by a calm that lasted for weeks. After that day, no one tried to build on the property again. Fences rotted, trees grew crooked, but each August, for one single evening, red blossoms appeared across the valley floor, vivid, luminous, and gone by morning. Botanists who came to collect samples found that the petals dissolved on touch, leaving only a trace of dark dust that smelled faintly of salt and iron. They called it contamination. The locals called it remembrance. In 1918, a young folklorist named Dr. Eliza Warren arrived from Boston, funded by the Historical Society to document regional superstitions. She was bright, skeptical, and methodical, the sort of woman the locals immediately distrusted. When she first mentioned the Whitlow property at a town gathering, every conversation ceased. The mayor told her plainly, "Some things stay quiet for a reason." But Eliza did not frighten Isla. On September 3, 1918, she rode out alone to the field. She brought wax cylinders, a phonograph, and a new notebook bound in red leather. She meant to record the hum people spoke of, to prove it was wind, or resonance, or perhaps trick acoustics from the hollow beneath the earth. Her first entry reads, "No sound discernible." The air, however, has pressured like a heartbeat beneath the ground. My instruments tremble without cause. She returned nightly for a week. On the 5th night, she left the recorder running and fell asleep beside it. When she played the wax cylinder the next morning, she found it had captured 12 minutes of what can only be described as singing, not melody, not language, yet deliberate, voices overlapping, rising and falling in unison like wind through reeds, but heavier, shaped by intention. Eliza sent the cylinder to her supervisor at Tulane University. It arrived cracked, the wax flaked away, leaving only the label she had scrawled on its tin, "Voices Beneath Soil, Whitlow Field." Still, she continued her study. Her notebook, later recovered from her boarding room, shows a shift from detached analysis to something else. Her final coherent entry, "The hum resolves itself into words if one listens long enough." Not English, Not any known tongue. I believe it to be composite dozens of languages woven together, repeating the same structure. Perhaps. Names, yes, names. After that, her handwriting becomes erratic, looping across pages. The last line, half buried in ink, reads, "They are not gone, only waiting to be remembered." Eliza vanished on September 15th. Her horse was found grazing near the creek, reins torn loose. A week later, children playing by the field discovered her red notebook lodged upright in the mud, as if placed there deliberately. Inside the back cover was a list written in dozens of scripts: Arabic, Yoruba, Latin, and others unknown. More than 1,400 names filled those pages. Many matched missing persons from plantation records between 1830 and 1850. The notebook was archived at Tulane under anonymous account. Undetermined origin, curators avoided discussing it. When played near the field, gramophones, sometimes distorted, whispering syllables not on the recording. One technician claimed he heard his mother's maiden name repeated 3 times before the machine. Caught fire by 1932. The phenomenon drew the attention of the Bureau of Ethnographic Studies, an early federal agency tasked with cataloging spiritual disturbances in post-war America. They sealed the property, erecting warning signs, citing contamination. But no chemicals were ever detected. In an internal memo dated April 9, 1933, one investigator wrote, "There is intelligence here. It communicates through resonance sound carried by pressure and mineral. Each voice, when isolated, corresponds to a life once lived. Together, they form an archive. The land itself is the record." The Bureau withdrew the following month. No report was ever published. That winter, during an unusually warm December, townspeople noticed new patterns appearing in the frost that formed on windows near the valley. Not random. Lines, arcs, and spirals matching the arrangement of the names in Eliza's notebook. No 2 panes showed the same pattern, yet each faded precisely at dawn. Some said it was the ground speaking again. Others whispered that the land had finally learned how to write back. By 1947, exactly 100 years after the first recorded incident, Whitlow property had become an unofficial boundary between memory and superstition. No one farmed there anymore, though the soil remained black and fertile. The last attempt at cultivation ended when the plowshare struck something metallic beneath the earth. The farmer, Luther Phelps, unearthed a sealed iron box no larger than a child's coffin. The hinges had fused with rust, yet, when opened, the interior was immaculate, lined with waxed linen and containing a single parchment wrapped in oilcloth. The document bore the date August 14, 1847, written in a fine, confident hand. The first line read, "To those who will come after, we act tonight, not in rebellion, but in redress." The signature at the bottom, Eleanor Whitlow. Her letter was both confession and manifesto. It detailed a network of women across the South who had, through careful learning from enslaved midwives, healers, and astronomers, performed synchronized rituals designed to stitch closed the wound our husbands carved. They called themselves the Circle of Remembrance. Eleanor's words echoed Charlotte Bogart's confession nearly verbatim, though the 2 women had never met. She wrote, "We are bridges between the guilty and the wronged. The child we call forth is not ours, but the reckoning made flesh, the future forcing itself upon an unworthy present." Historians who later examined the letter noted its eerie preservation. The ink remained wet enough to stain fingers. Some claimed it smelled faintly of copper and rain. The letter's discovery made national news for a week before vanishing from archives entirely. The iron box itself disappeared during transfer to the State Historical Repository. Within months, Luther Phelps fell ill with a fever that no physician could explain. Before dying, he reportedly told his wife, "She's awake again, and she remembers me." By 1951, the locals spoke of lights moving over the field on December nights, slow, deliberate motions that formed concentric rings visible only from the air. Aerial photographs taken by state surveyors revealed symmetrical burn patterns hundreds of feet wide, arranged like spirals within spirals. An unnamed official in Baton Rouge referred to the area as the Reckoning Field. In 1962, an anthropology graduate student named Daniel Carr attempted to record ambient audio at the site for his thesis on acoustic phenomena in sacred landscapes. His recordings captured something uncanny. A low hum, threaded with distinct human breath, sounds thousands of them. Exhaling in unison, the frequencies registered far below human hearing. Yet when slowed and amplified, they formed intelligible phrases. "We are the debt. We are the balance." Daniel abandoned his research and joined the ministry soon after. His notes, preserved by his daughter, describe recurring dreams of a child made of light and shadow who spoke in overlapping voices. It asked him a single question: how long must the land remember alone? By the 1970s, the state fenced off the area completely, citing unexploded ordnance from the Civil War, but locals knew better. The field had become a pilgrimage site for descendants of the enslaved, who claimed to dream more vividly after visiting, dreams that felt less like visions and more like shared memory. Some returned saying they had met their ancestors face to face. Others refused to speak at all. The last documented phenomenon occurred on August 15, 1984, when a satellite passing overhead detected a brief, intense heat signature from the exact coordinates of the field. It lasted 7 seconds and left no trace on the ground, except that every compass within 20 miles began pointing not north, but toward the Whitlow estate. Whatever stirred beneath that soil had marked its anniversary well. By 2003, the Whitlow property had been erased from most official maps. The land records listed it as private conservation territory, though no trust claimed ownership. The fence rusted, the warning signs fell, and yet no one trespassed. Travelers who cut across the old parish road spoke of feeling off balance, as though the air itself leaned toward the east. The last known Whitlow descendant, Dr. Miriam Unsell, moved back to St. Florentine Parish that year. A pathologist by training, she claimed her purpose was genealogical closure. She kept to herself, living in the gutted remains of the farmhouse, the same one her ancestors had built in 1829. Locals said she worked mostly by candlelight, taking soil samples, pressing them into thin glass slides, and muttering as though listening for a reply. Her private notes, recovered after her disappearance in 2007, were addressed to no one. The entries began clinically measurements of mineral density, humidity, and magnetic flux, but by late entries, the tone shifted. The Earth vibrates at 19 Hz nightly, peaking precisely at 3:14 a.m. I believe it to be respiratory. When I sleep, I dream not as myself, but as a woman sewing in candlelight. The thread smells of blood and iron. There are 3 knocks on the floorboards every dawn. I have stopped checking the door. Her last complete entry, dated August 14, 2007, reads, It wants to finish what was promised. The balance remains uncollected. She vanished the next night. No signs of struggle, only her boots at the door, both filled with damp soil. When investigators entered the basement, they found a table laid out with what appeared to be dozens of fetal casts made from wax and salt. Each one bore a single letter carved into its chest. When arranged alphabetically, they spelled, "Remember her." The air in the cellar was unnaturally cold. One deputy swore he saw condensation form words across the glass slide cabinet. It was never the curse. It was the inheritance. In 2011, a corporate development group attempted to purchase the property for a bioagricultural testing site. The chief surveyor, David Hensley, documented the field's unusual texture, soft, as if hollow beneath. On their third excavation, machinery struck a layer of compacted bone. Not human, not animal, something transitional. Vertebrae fused in unnatural symmetry, like the echo of a form that had never fully decided what it wished to become. Hensley resigned 2 weeks later, describing persistent auditory hallucinations, a woman humming a lullaby in no known language. Within a month, he was found drowned in his home bathtub, the water thick with red silt. Today, satellite imagery still refuses to hold the site in focus. Photos blur, drones crash, and compass readings twist in lazy spirals. The parish locals have stopped referring to it as the Whitlow place. They simply call it the remembering ground. On cold nights, the soil breathes again. Children say you can hear the whisper if you press your ear to the earth. We are not gone. We are underneath. And if you listen long enough, another voice joins them, calmer, older. Patient, you will be too. So they keep the fences up, not to protect the living from what's buried, but to protect what's buried from the living, because the land does not forgive, it remembers.